friends of the Dar, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight, we have the pleasure of once again hosting a truly distinguished speaker this cultural season, who has continued to enrich our understanding of Kuwait's early history. Tonight's lecture will offer a general overview of Kuwait's history and society, spanning the early founding of Kuwait, relations with the Ottomans and the British, politics and government, as well as demographic and social changes. Our lecturer this evening is Dr. Hesham Al-Awadi. Dr. Hesham Al-Awadi is a professor in history at the American University of Kuwait. He was a lecturer in modern Middle East politics at Exeter University and a visiting professor at George Washington University. He completed his Bachelor of Arts, Masters of Arts, Master of Philosophy, and PhD in the field of Middle Eastern history in various British universities, including the University of Cambridge. Additionally, Dr. Hesham Al-Awadi is a recipient of the Innovative Lecturer Award. His taught courses include History of Kuwait and History of the Gulf. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hesham Al-Awadi to the podium.
Good evening to all of you. I would like to start by thanking Dar al-Athar, al-Islamiyyah, and Sheikh Hassa Sabah al-Salim Sabah for her second kind, generous invitation to share with you some of the thoughts about Kuwait's history and its importance. And initially, when I came here, I had the intention to speak as if it was a TED Talk. Very formal, single idea, powerful idea, no more than 18 minutes. But I said, I think I feel this warm environment of sitting with people who I consider friends. And rather than being formal, why not become a little bit personal? Why not express your vulnerability and say that this is an idea and an argument that is in the making, I'm thinking about it, and I want to propose it to you and see what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And why? And my basic argument, ladies and gentlemen, that I would like today to share with you, with no exaggeration, because that's what I deeply believe in, is the following: that the history of Kuwait, if well told, is not just fascinating, but I feel is essential, necessary, and indispensable, right? Not only is it fascinating, but it's essential. And that is the argument that I would like to actually prove to you. Before I do this, I must be realistic enough to recognize that there are negative perceptions that people have about history in general. Not to mention Kuwait history, but history in general. The first perception is that history is boring. And perhaps what makes it boring is the fact that it is irrelevant. It's about people who are dead, black and white, the past, much of which has changed today. So what's in it for me? And as a teacher who teaches students, that's what students tell me. That with a career in history or in social sciences, there are no promising careers, as for example, if you study medicine, engineering, and business. And jokingly or seriously, I always mention the story of J.K. Rowling and the amount of money that she was able to make, not on heart surgery, but on writing novels, that today they say that she is the fourth wealthiest person in the United Kingdom, the first, of course, being the Queen of England. And it strikes me, therefore, that if someone like Rowling can become a bestseller and a wealthy person by writing fiction, can we today try to secure half of the success by writing about non-fiction? I do believe wholeheartedly that history, and particularly the history of Kuwait, is extremely exciting. And when I think about this, I think about the fact that history might not just be a boring read of a 200 or 300 book. It could be talking or reading about an object that you love. If you love stamps, you might read about the history of stamps. If you love cars, you might read about the history of cars. Engineer Sabah al-Rais, that I'm honored to actually attend my talk today, have used engineering to talk about the history of Kuwait. You don't know this, but I tell you that I now am telling my students in my course on Kuwait, particularly those who are majoring in engineering because they don't like history, that even when you study engineering, engineering in Kuwait has a history. Anything could be historicized. Of course, I had the honor of being invited by the Dar to talk about my book, which talks about the history of ideas. But ladies and gentlemen, even if you don't like reading, history can come in different forms of communication. If you like comic strips and drawings and pictures, you might still also not be denied the opportunity of becoming well-versed with the Kuwait's history if you read an illustrated version of Kuwait's history. If you like drama or movies, you might actually also learn about Kuwait's history. Of course, not all of it is accurate. 100%, I'm not advocating that movies replace a book, but maybe that will whet your appetite a little bit to begin, therefore, to read books after you fell in love with history. And I know that you can fall in love with history if done well. In fact, falling in love with a certain episode can lead you to love the country, love its cities, love its coasts, love its language, so much as to learn it. Young Kuwaitis today, some of them speak fluent Turkish after seeing Harim al-Sultan. This is a challenge I throw to you, young generation, graduates of computer science and graphic design. Can you come up with an engaging, interactive game that rather than just speaks about or involves the Second World War, can talk about, in a game way, the Battle of Al-Rigga or Al-Jahra battle, or if you don't like battles and into Minecraft and Lego, come up with a peaceful context, yet advocating Kuwait's history? If the Turks could do it, if the designers of Call of Duty can do it, I'm sure that we can do it. Ladies and gentlemen, not only do I believe that Kuwait history is exciting, and this is not my argument today, because that is maybe an exhausted one. My argument today is a little bit more difficult, and that is, I believe that Kuwait's history is essential, is necessary, is indispensable. And I want to make 3 arguments why I believe so. The first argument is that it's important for the people's identity. And if I was talking to an American audience in the States, I would be saying the same thing, because that's what this great historian, Peter Stearns, says. And he's a great historian, and I like his writings because he's among the rare historians that has this magical ability to speak about sophisticated subjects in a non-sophisticated manner. In fact, he has a fascinating book called World History, The Basics, and he speaks about anything except world history. He speaks how to appreciate time and how to appreciate place. He's not bogged down into events and details as much as concepts and patterns. This is what he has to say about history and its importance. I've seen many students. When I came to AUK in 2005, the only history course that was taught at the university since I joined was world history. in the 20th century. And I taught it many times until we got divorced, me and the subject, because we got fed up of each other. I taught it, and it was the only course that was taught by me. But before I divorced world history, I suggested to the administration an observation that I observed. In 2008, I realized that after all these years, I'm teaching world history, I'm teaching Hitler, Churchill, Second World War, First World War, to a young generation of Kuwaitis. A lot of that came from British schools and American schools. And I realized that a lot of them, having done their GCSEs and A-levels, know much about Hitler more than I know. And they know about the First World War and the Second World War. They know more about Queen Victoria than they know about her contemporary, Sheikh Mubarak the Great. They know more about Hitler than they know more about his contemporary, Sheikh Ahmed al-Jabr. Could you believe that? And they said to us, they said to me, Professor, we are Kuwaitis, but we don't know much about Kuwait as we know about European history. So I proposed that there should be a course, Kuwait history. Until today, I teach it, and it's one among the popular courses in Kuwait's history. Not because I teach it, but because it fills a gap. So I feel that he's right. He has a point. That's not closing up to the world. We are still global, we are still open, but we need to have this kind of a core identity. And listen, with all respect, I'm not talking about the flags, I'm not talking about the songs, I'm not talking about celebrating February. This is all amazing. But if that identity is not based on strong foundation that has its roots it's in the past, it's going to be with time shaky and seasonal and ceremonial. We want it to be injected in the DNA in a natural format. One that is based on sentiment, but also logic, heart, but also mind. That's the kind of identity that I think he's talking about. The second argument that I would like to make as to why I believe Kuwait history is important is that because I think it has a lot to do with the future of Kuwait. Now, I know that there is a lot of skepticism about slogans such as New Kuwait, such as Kuwait 2035, but I do know that the future of Kuwait will involve certain patterns. Let me share with you some of these patterns. We agree or disagree about the specificities, about the tall of the buildings, about the length of the bridges, the destination and the places. We might have a debate on that. But let's actually pin down, to my mind, a certain pattern that if you are not aware of, I think we will be missing the point. I think that after the invasion of Kuwait, we've learned, among many lessons, a very difficult, unpleasant lesson. That we have always been neutral. We have always kept to our own business. Our small size dictated that. If there is a war between Iraq and Iran, ideally would like to be neutral. When Kuwait was invaded, it took the world a while to begin to make a decision that Kuwait was worth liberating. There were debates in the United Nations, there were debates in the Congress, there were debates in France. And Kuwaitis learned the lesson that we need to have greater exposure in the world, to be less vulnerable. And should we encounter a crisis, we need the world to feel our existence rather than debate where do we exist on the map and needing to name a bigger country and say, aha, you are close to that bigger country. Kuwait wants today, to my mind, and that is the vision, to be an indispensable player in politics, in economy, and in the world. And it's doing this in multiple different ways. For example, the humanitarian way. Between two GCC countries, it wants to arbitrate. In Syria, it wants to arbitrate. In Yemen, it wants to arbitrate. Today, it wants to urbanize and rebuild Iraq, despite the agonies of the past. It wants to show itself as an important humanitarian center. And the United Nations have rewarded its leader by assigning him the title of a humanitarian leader. I am in Dar al-Athar, right? And there are amazing cultural centers that are being now inaugurated. Markaz Jabir al-Ahmed, Markaz Abdullah Salim. These are cultural centers. Opera, music, theater. Ahmed al-Adwani's music, again, serving history through music. Kuwait wants also to become a financial and commercial center, right? So again, wanting to be a center of a global nature, humanitarian, cultural, and financial. طيب شو العلاقة? What's the connection? What's your point? My point is that all these kind of centers will necessitate an influx of people. There will be people who will be visiting for cultural reasons, for touristic reasons, for commercial reasons, for humanitarian reasons. Why else do you build an airport that technically and theoretically accommodate more than 25 million, other than expecting that there will be a tremendous influx of people from the east and from the west? Tourists, teachers in the newly private emerging schools and universities, diplomats, NGOs opening offices for NATO and for the United Nations, travelers, 25 million, some of them on transit, but then they need to remain a couple of days in one of the hotels. Employees created by these islands that one day will become the site of the commercial centers. But most importantly, strategic investors that want to seize opportunities to invest and to enter into partnership with local Kuwaitis. Doctor, شو العلاقة? What is the connection? I want to make the connection. And tell me if it makes sense. The connection is that there will be a growing market for people who want to learn and know how is it to do business in Kuwait. How do we do business in Kuwait? And they will come to conclude that much of doing business in any country, doing business in China, doing business in India, doing business anywhere, is not about the business, but it's about understanding the local business culture of the people. If you want to do business in Japan, you need to understand the local Japanese culture so as not to offend your strategic partner. And however wonderful your dream is of establishing this commercial center, he will not sign a contract because he or she were offended of your ignorance of the ABC of their culture. There is a tremendous market today for people who want to be consulted on local culture. When I was in London a few years ago, I received a call from a firm, a consultancy firm. I didn't even ask, how did you get my number? He said, listen, we are a consultancy firm for those Americans who want to do business in Kuwait. And we have this very rich person who wants to do business in Kuwait, but he's worried about his wife coming and staying in Kuwait, perhaps most of the time alone in an apartment while he's doing and conducting his business. His wife wants to know the culture of the people, when to shake hands, when to smile, how to dress, how to behave, because he's so much worried. And if he feels comfortable that his wife will be safe and comfortable and happy, he will make the decision to come and do the business in Kuwait. Can you see now the connection between business as not being a pure capitalist endeavor of just wanting to make money, and between understanding the local culture of the people? And what is the connection between culture and history? They say that history is on the top factors that actually make up a culture. Religion is important, language is important, education is important, but actually history is important. Let me give you an example. Do you want an example? I mean, we say when you don't want more coffee, just shake the cup. And what does that mean? Why don't you simply say, no, thank you, no more? Why do you just shake the cup? You shake the cup because Kuwait is a high context culture as opposed to a low context culture. What is the difference between the two? A low context culture, whereby the meaning is within the language, the verbal that we use. So if I say no thank you, it means no thank you. I don't need to make any gestures. If I say yes, it means yes. But a high context culture, minimal language and a lot of context. You need to be aware of the context to understand the language. And the context or the language is in my body language, is in my tone. And therefore I shake the cup because that is gesturing no more thank you. But where does this shaking of a cup comes from? It comes from history, whereby the people in the Arabian desert used to employ tea boys and coffee boys that were in most cases either slaves that didn't know Arabic deliberately, or people that were deaf, deliberately deaf. They employed deliberately deaf people because they were afraid that that might be spies carrying the news to the opponent tribal people. And therefore this tea boy, coffee boy didn't understand Arabic, and therefore he needed to understand sign language. Gone are the deaf people, gone are the slave tea boys, but remained the sheikh. And the sheikh became an indispensable cultural trait till today in modern post-oil Kuwait. If you understand that, you understand that, inshallah, is not embedded in the literal meaning of God willing. It is embedded more in the historical value that a Bedouin never says no to your face because that is disrespectful. So he disguises the no with inshallah, which could mean yes, or it could mean not now, or it could mean yisir khair, or it could mean no. But you will never figure it out unless you understand the tone and the context of when he said it and how he said it. Gitlik, high context culture, as opposed to a low context culture. In this book, they say that when you go and do business with a Kuwaiti, don't be offended when you go to their office and see multiple people sitting in the office, and he is being intercepted or interrupted by telephones, and he answers the phone, and then he forgets what you said, and he asks you to repeat what you said. And if you show irritation, he might be offended. Why this? Why can't you see him face to face, one to one? Well, because history explains it. That how was the open desert and the open tent, where the sheikh sits at the heart of the tent and everyone is sitting. You might have kilmat ras, head to head, person to person, but that was not the norm. You can't say, can I wait until everyone in the tent left? You needed to adapt to the situation and speak in public and be interrupted and adapt to that. If you understand history, you understand culture. If you understand culture, only then can you hope to do business, and it is this that can help Kuwait become a commercial center. This is the last argument. It's a little bit difficult, this one. So, ladies and gentlemen, so far I said history is important. Forget about fascinating, it is. But history is important because it's important for our identity. And the second thing, because it's going to be indispensable, it seems, to the future of Kuwait. Number 3, if the future of Kuwait is to be realized successfully, it will necessitate that our graduates come with a certain sets of skills that will enable them to actually make that future of Kuwait successful. Because isn't Kuwait 2035 will be based on the private sector, not anymore as has been the welfare state by the government, it will be by the private sector. We have Kuwaitization. We have young people going and being employed by the private sector. Now, the private sector's challenges are going to be different than the government, right? The sort of prerequisite. I'm not going to employ you simply because you're Kuwaiti and I am expected to employ you. No, I employ you because, yes, Al-Ain you are Kuwaiti, but you also have the skills that I need to flourish as a private sector. I feel that history of Kuwait can help build some of the skills. And before you stone me, I'll tell you why. Just be patient. The one that realized that there was a gap between the educational output and the sort of lack of competitiveness was, of course, Sheikh Nasser. He was the one that alluded to that kind of reality, that there is a gap between the thousands of graduates and between the needs of the markets. I've always thought, ladies and gentlemen, what sort of skills do young people today need? I've always thought about that. And I said, if I can come up with a list of skills and just write about them, maybe I have done the new generation a service. So I wrote this book. I wrote it, by the way, before Hebbe. I wrote it in 2017. Published by Madarik in Saudi Arabia. It's in its 3rd edition today. They tell me that there are over 4,000 that have been sold within a year. Within a year. It's good in the Arab world. It's not a bestseller in millions like Stephen Covey, but it's good. And in that book, I write about 70 skills that I believe are going to be important in the 21st century. How to discover your talent. How to give feedback without offending the person that you assess. How to think critically. How to deal with difficult personalities. How to give a presentation. How to give a PowerPoint presentation. How to solve a problem. How to be creative. 70 skills. But listen, if you think 70 skills is a lot, let me reduce them to 7. This is an amazing book that was written a few years ago. And I spoke about this book in a conference that was called Fikr in Morocco, sponsored by the then ex-Minister of Education, Emir Khalid al-Faisal. And he was sitting here in the front, and I brought this book. I later realized that he had this book, and he discussed it with his employees in the Ministry of Education, telling them that we need to see these skills that this book is talking about and see how we can activate them. In the conference, when I gave my talk, I said, listen, if the GCC today can come together and agree that they somehow coordinate their curriculum just to hit and serve these 7 key skills that Tony Wagner is arguing will be challenging and indispensable in the 21st century, I think we can rest assured that we are ready for Kuwait 2035. Of course, each skill he writes in a chapter, but I've reduced them. Problem solving and creativity, communication, written and oral, flexibility and adaptability simply means responding to change, and we are going through very difficult times of change. Initiative and risk-taking, and tolerating failure, because there is something called smart failure. Teamwork and collaboration. والفضول, curiosity. مو الفضول إن you put your nose and gossip about everyone and everything. No. Curiosity that will make you develop, create, and innovate. What is the connection between that? Go and listen to these motivational videos. Go and read about their self-development books. They always talk about Benjamin Franklin, Mother Teresa, I have a dream, Martin Luther, Gandhi, Steve Jobs. طيب ما في مشكلة, that's okay. Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, Rocky Balboa, ما في مشكلة. But aren't there others? Aren't there events in our history that we can use to actually ignite and inspire the new generation? Hitting two birds with one stone, using history to build their identity, but also to build their sets of skills. We always talk about collaboration, and we always talk about السيب والنهام والغواص والنوخذة, but have we actually narrated it from the perspective of saying it in such a way in a kindergarten, in a nursery, in a school, to advocate to Ahmed, Muhammad, Mshari and Hassa that teamwork is rooted in our history? Malcolm Gladwell have written a book called Blink. Why do some people make decisions at snap moments? And he talks about the Japanese people and the Chinese people. And he asks the question, why is it that Chinese people prosper in American universities in the States in subjects like maths and engineering? He says because these subjects need a lot of patience. And he uses history to explain why Chinese people are by default patient, by actually talking about the history of China as a rice-producing country. And rice as a crop needs a lot of patience because it takes time until it grows. And then I ask myself, why when I give a paper in the test for my Kuwaiti students, immediately they read the paper, they don't understand it, they panic, they raise their hand. Doctor, is there a mistake in the question? They don't want to actually sit and try to understand the question, so they assume that there is a mistake in the question. Because I don't understand the question, there is a mistake on behalf of the professor. And I tell them, be not like the Chinese, be like the old Kuwaitis that were patient because everything in their life necessitated patience. Today it will rain, tomorrow Allah yastar, it might not rain. Nasbur. Patience, consistency, endurance is one of the much needed skills. Akhir shay, I'll share with you this story. Ladies and gentlemen, during the 1930s, that was one of the worst decades in Kuwait's economy. There was this global recession that hit and struck the United States, but flourished and expanded throughout Europe and impacted Kuwait, of course, because much of Kuwait's economy was tied to India, which was tied to Britain, which was tied to Europe. And Britain, of course, took a lot of money from America because of the First World War expenses, so everyone was devastated. A second unpleasant development happened, and that's the discovery of the Japanese pearls. The selling of pearls in Kuwait plummeted, and there was a recession. There was a lot of pearls, but no one is interested in buying them. Why? Because people didn't have money in Europe. They just had enough to eat, not to wear jewelry and make themselves beautiful. And if they wanted to have pearls, they will buy the Japanese pearls. It's bigger, more colorful, and guess what? It's cheaper. Some Kuwaiti merchants, and they later write in their letters, took the risk and said, I'm not going to depend on the Indians that are telling me that no one in Europe is interested in our pearls. I'm going to personally go to France and to London. And we have a story of one merchant during the late 1920s going in the streets of Paris, knocking on the jewelers' houses and doors, telling them, are you interested in Kuwaiti pearls? No, thank you, it's expensive. Fine, it's expensive, but do you know why it's expensive? It's expensive because X and Y and Z, right? So this idea of risk-taking. And then he writes a letter to his friends in Kuwait and say, guess what? I've sold a few pearls. Yes, there is recession, but I've managed to persuade some French to buy my pearls. You should try coming to Paris. Initiative, risk-taking is not confined to Steve Jobs. It could also be expanded to Hamoud and Mshari and Ali, if told properly. Does this play, this Instagram? I hope it does. Every time I conclude my History of Kuwait course, I ask the students to do 3 things. I ask them to read at least one book on the history of Kuwait, and it could be the illustrated book that I referred to, any book. Number 2, get inspired by a story and share it on the social media. Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, but share. So learn and then teach. Balash teach. Learn and then share. And number 3, not only share, but when you comment, somehow connected with a skill. Somehow call for action. Not just share a story like Hababa used to do. Share a story, but also call for action. Nasser was one of my former students. He's not old, but that was also a few years ago. Married, have kids, and now works in a governmental sector. This is one of the Instagram that he did whilst he was doing my History of Kuwait course.
25 فبراير مو يوم الاستقلال. 25 فبراير يوم جلوس الشيخ عبد الله السالم. 19 يونيو يوم الاستقلال. تبي تبين حبك للكويت؟ اقرا عن تاريخ.
You want to show your love for Kuwait? Read its history. Ladies and gentlemen, I conclude by saying that I wanted to prove to you today, I hope I succeeded, even if partially, that not only is Kuwait history fascinating and is fun to read, and can sometimes make you wealthy if you narrate it in a way that is smart and intelligent, but it's indispensable, because it's indispensable to your identity as a Kuwaiti citizen. It's also important for Kuwait future, and it's also important for the success skills that Kuwait's future necessitates. Thank you so much.